This course has really given me a wide variety of Japanese cinema knowledge, kind of dating all the way back to the Jidaigeki to more recent stuff, all the way to the 1980s, 1990s. But one area left mostly unexplored in this course would be Japanese documentaries. Last semester, I had the opportunity to take a Japanese class called Culture Through Documentaries, where I was learning Japanese through the context of multiple documentaries in Japan, and that really sparked an interest in this form of media for me. And as soon as this project was announced, I instantly knew that I wanted to take a deeper dive into documentaries and specifically the ethics. For this project, I'm going to be doing a deeper dive into 4 documentaries. I'll be referencing other ones, especially towards the end. However, I'm really going to do a deep dive into 4 different documentaries. And then at the end, we're going to kind of look at a scale of morality and ethics through these documentaries. So thank you guys for tuning in. Chronologically, the first one to occur would be A Man Vanishes, all the way back from 1967. This is before the days of Shohei Imamura was directing films such as Vengeance is Mine. This, I was always told, was a documentary where it's following the disappearance of a man, and lots of personal interviews are done around his family, his friends, his coworkers, and kind of the more that comes out, the more of a conflicting image we have on this man. He seems to just disappear out of nowhere, seems to be a good person, but kind of the more you watch, kind of the more unclear it gets. When finally, in a culmination of things, at the very end of the film, a fisherman comes in and claims some very conflicting information, really trying to implicate one of the sisters for his disappearance, where she just completely denies this. After they start arguing for about 5 to 6 minutes, really, Shohei Imamura kind of takes the camera back and reveals that the entire thing has been a set. And this is not a documentary film. This is a real film. So as I watched the entire film, I really thought that I was watching a real documentary about Johatsu, which is disappearance, which is a real societal issue in Japan, where people just go completely missing and they don't tell anyone. And it's not like they were kidnapped or anything. They just completely go out on their free will. However, Imamura really tried to meticulously craft this film, so as you're watching it, you think it's a real documentary, and then at the very end, the rug is pulled out from under you and it's completely fake. I think kind of starting the scene with this in documentaries is very interesting, and it also brings up kind of the ethical implications, because before this was revealed, it was a film and not a documentary. It was starting to get quite personal and a lot of information that maybe the disappeared man would not want to be public. However, knowing now that it's a film, I feel like we can really use this as like a case study to the side on what's okay and what's going to be a film. Just for a little bit of background, the Yondai Kyogai Byo, or the 4 biological diseases of Japan, were 4 documented diseases in Japan that were all caused by unnatural effects, mostly done with pollution and contamination. Specifically, the Minamata disease was a disease where poisonous mercury was implemented into the water from Shisho Corporation, and because of this, there was a village who got all of their food from the ocean, and by eating these fish, they all got mercury poisoning, which can cause deformation. It's very easily to spread through pregnancies and go on to the next generations, and it can affect mental development, and it's just a very horrible disease overall. And so Tsuchimoto, the director of this film, he basically went to this village and he ended up making a series of 3 documentaries going over kind of the people and their world. It's not necessarily about how this happened. It's more about daily life from town to town. The documentary was really just conducted mostly by interviews, documenting people fishing, and while they all knew that this was happening, it wasn't really like they could do anything else because their primary source of food was from that. Later on in the documentary, something that I thought was actually quite interesting is most people from the town started buying up very small amounts of stock from the Shisho Corporation. So then they were able to go to the actual meetings and kind of yell at the corporation, try to get any sort of reparation for what they would do, because both the government and the Shisho Corporation were not trying to take any guilt on this on their own. So in this sense, having a documentary kind of showcasing these people, bringing it into the public eye, I think really helped. This happening all around the 1960s, this was a very volatile period in Japan's political history. This is very close proximity to the Ampo protest, and there was just a lot of cultural unrest in general. So just seeing again how such a big corporation would just completely destroy a village and take no blame and not do anything could be really upsetting for a lot of people. And also, because this is a documentary, this preserves this for the future. So even people in my generation and future generations can go back and watch this and actually see more about what happened, hear about these And one of the only ways to truly not repeat history is to learn it. And hopefully, going forwards, we can hold more corporations accountable for what they do. Another documentary that follows a similar vein would be Summer in Naruto. That's the English name. The Japanese name would translate more literally to the Japanese Liberation Front, the Summer in Sanrizuka. This is a documentary filmed about the tassel of constructing the Narita airport. So for those people that have been to Japan before, they might know that the Narita airport is built. However, they might not know what's going on or what was the struggle going back into the day. So as the case with a lot of airport constructions, the government wanted to build this airport. So in order to do this, they needed to buy out the land, but this land belonged to farmers who had been farming on the same land for years and years, and they were very unwilling to give up or sell their land. And even though it was not stated directly in the documentary, it can be assumed that the prices that they were being asked to sell their land for was probably not the most favorable. Even if it's what the government decided, it's what their land was. It's a very common theme. So this film was also filmed in 1968. This is 1 year after a man vanishes and 3 years before Minamata, the victims in their world. And this is another film where they're standing up for people that not necessarily cannot stand for themselves. Ogawa, who is considered to be one of the godfathers of Japanese documentaries, the other one being Tsuchimoto, they came to this village. They stayed there for just weeks and months on end. And basically every day for months and months, inspectors would come to their farmers' fields and just try to get all the people to sell their land. And instead of selling their land, these people would stand their ground. And I think one cultural aspect that really contributed to this would be the Vietnam War. Because in the documentary, some of the farmers said that they saw how the people of Vietnam were outclassed by the Americans. They had a lot less money, they had a lot less numbers, but just by being unresilient or by being resilient and not giving up, they completely held their land and they were able to be successful in the end. So that was something that was really holding these people forwards. And the tensions were quite high day to day. There were also lots of college student protesters who would come and they would actually fight the police and the inspectors. And as the documentary went on, you could kind of see it start to get more and more violent, which is something to note because while tensions were getting more and more violent, it also kind of begs the question of, was this getting more and more violent because of the documentaries? Were the people feeling they were more justified in their actions because they were being portrayed over camera? And as we look at the next documentary, I want to keep this question close to mind. The next documentary is The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On. So this is following a man named Okuzaki, and he was deeply scarred from being in World War II and going to Papua New Guinea, and he has a lot of PTSD, and I understand what he's trying to do and what he's trying to talk about was not something spoken about widely in the Japanese population. Just for a little bit of reference, during the end of World War II, there were a lot of other military units that were sent to places such as Papua New Guinea, and they were very low on food, and in order to do that, cannibalism was something that occurred. And this was not spoken about widely or mainstream in Japanese. It was almost kind of kept as a taboo secret, but Okuzaki really wanted to confront those people who he was with, his leaders, and just everything that went wrong. And I understand that giving a man a platform like this can be useful, again, because in our other examples, like the Summer in Naruto and the Minamata, both of those are good people to give audiences to where they're standing up for issues that they can't really stand up on their own. However, for Okuzaki, he kind of takes this further and further. He's trying to get out the bottom of the truth. He originally gets the family of a member who was eaten, and he gets their family and tries to kind of get to the truth, to the bottom of it. But eventually his questioning kind of just gets too aggressive for the family's comfort, so they kind of back out. But instead of just stopping there, he decides to hire 2 actors to pretend to be the parents, and he kind of goes to more and more people saying, oh, these are their parents, and they're crying, but they were just paid actors. And it really, again, it kind of begs the question, would he have been doing this if he wasn't on site for this documentary? And as the documentary goes further, he even ends up beating someone during the interrogation, which raises so many ethical questions in my opinion, because first of all, the director, who's just sitting there not doing anything, Hara Kazuo, he is considered to be a genius of documentary, but he's also considered to be very controversial because he simply just, his philosophy is more along the lines of, it's going to happen anyways, I'm just documenting it, I'm not interfering. However, when it comes to people actually getting hurt for this documentary, that's a different story. And then taking it to the very next level, at the end of this documentary, there is kind of like an addendum at the very end where it's saying at the end of the film, Okazaki tried to assassinate the son of his leader from the war, and he got arrested for doing this. And it really begs the question of, should this man be given a platform? How ethical is this? Because there is definitely net positive coming from this. Speaking about such taboo topics can kind of help them come more into the mainstream, help people realize and understand their griefs. However, trying to take the life of a man for a documentary is just kind of a lot over the top. While the subject of Japanese documentaries is very quite vast, even taking an entire class on this beforehand, I still feel like I learned quite a lot for this. I still want to try to wrap up my findings and kind of talk about each one in kind of a bigger picture instead of just doing 4 simple case studies. I think the difference between these 4 movies and how they approached these ethical topics is actually almost like a scale, if you want to put it that way. Because on one side, we have the example of not even a documentary, so it's completely ethical in the sense of the film For a Man Vanishes, because since it's not a real story, all of the information wasn't real. Maybe the only unethical thing would maybe be like playing with the viewer's feelings, but definitely kind of no harm coming from that. Then kind of the next step on our scale, I would put Summer in Naruto, and I would also put Minamata, where these are both doing good things, bringing positives to the society. I think both of these documentaries can really teach the viewer a lot about what was going on in the time in Japan. And I also think that at the time they fit the political climate very well. And that was something that kind of standing up for these people that can't stand up for themselves is definitely a good thing. I would say maybe Summer in Naruto is a little bit more violent, although the people that are living in the Naruto village themselves aren't violent. Some college students and protesters come and they do fight on behalf of those people. So I would say that maybe documenting that is a little bit too much. But if you watch the documentary, they mainly just talk about it and it kind of stays less violent. However, the Minamata documentary, completely non-violent. Maybe the most there is shouting and crying just because it's a very sensitive subject and a lot of emotions are involved with just how these people have been wronged by this company. And then I feel like I could talk quite a lot about The Emperor's Naked Army, and there really are pros and cons. It's not really easy. It's not really fair for me to sit here and say that this movie is all good or this movie is all bad. Definitely lines were crossed. Ethical lines were crossed. There should not have been beating in any of the interviewing. I personally think it's unethical to hire someone's parents, even though they're not real, to try to bring out a confession on emotions, especially when that's not real. And then obviously trying to end the life of someone because of this, because of the documentary that you're currently working on. I think it's pretty plain to see that this is definitely like overstepping that. And again, I really wonder how much of this was exacerbated by the fact that Ozokazi was on video the whole time and he felt righteous with what he was doing, and it might have given him that kind of that push he needed. However, again, I don't think it's fair to say that this is the director's fault, because in the past, Okazaki had actually been arrested for trying to kill the Emperor of Japan by slingshotting pachinko balls at him. So he's definitely shown violence in the past. However, I think it's different slingshotting, which is definitely dangerous and definitely bad. He should have been arrested for it, versus showing up at the house of the former leader of his unit trying to kill him. And since the leader wasn't there, he tried to kill his son. And just having that kind of an afterword in the documentary as part of like the complete narrative kind of makes you think like, is this really the best type of person we should be giving a platform? In the future, I really hope that I can expand my knowledge on Japanese documentaries, kind of connecting this to a couple other documentaries I've seen, like Kingdoms of Dreams and Madness. This was a documentary about Hayao Miyazaki, the creator of Studio Ghibli, kind of more about his everyday life. I feel like there wasn't really a big ethical challenge presented there. It was mostly talking about like his daily life when he was working on the film The Wind Rises, and kind of just his overall thoughts on Studio Ghibli as a whole. So I would say there wasn't really too much of a ethical issue there. I've also watched Ampo Art by War, which documented the protests that I did mention briefly that were happening in Japan, mainly in the 1960s. I think that was actually quite a well done documentary, especially because it was just trying to really capture the entire political climate of Japan at the time. And while it was showing the protests, I would go as far to argue in this example that this was not being exacerbated by the documentaries. This was really something that a lot of Japan felt very passionate about and were going to do kind of regardless of if there was a camera or not. And the cameras were not at the forefront. If you kind of go back and watch that, the scale of the protests were very quite large. Another environmental ethical documentary I watched was about the Fukushima disaster in 2011. Little Voices about Fukushima. This didn't really focus on a dramatic recreation. I know there have been a lot of series, and I think that kind of recreating some of that, while it is informative, can be very sensitive to the people that were there and a lot of the people that suffered critical radiation from that. But Little Voices really just tried to focus on just nuclear, trying to just focus on the victims, and also kind of comparing this to Chernobyl and talking about how there were places in Japan that were really trying to rehabilitate and get the layer of radioactivity down. So again, I think that this would kind of fall into the same category as Minamata. So overall, I think the main argument that I'm trying to make here is that the ethics in documentary is not really black and white. There's not really, this is a right way to make a documentary, this is a wrong way to do it. But when you kind of look at it, I think that there's subcategories, which again, I would maybe categorize them as one subcategory is standing up for people that can't stand up for themselves. And then the other category, which is easier to say is wrong, is platforming a man that maybe shouldn't be platformed. With, I would say, the prime example of that is The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On, which again, I do think there's net good that came from that movie. Talking about cannibalism, especially in World War II, is a very taboo subject that was not talked about much. Kind of bringing that to light, I think, is very, very important, and especially for the people, the family members of those people that might have died due to that. However, there are many better ways to go about that. And yeah, overall, I had a great time researching for this project. I feel like I kind of jumped into a deep, deep rabbit hole, and I really hope I can revisit here sometime. So if you watched all the way to the end, thank you so much, and have a nice day.